When God created us, He made us creatures of time. The world in which we live is a world in which time passes. And so we have all kinds of devices that we use to keep time. We have wrist watches and pocket watches and wall clocks, and then we have atomic clocks that you can buy so that you'll know exactly what time it is, and we have calendars to keep track of days and weeks and months. I think I have 5 calendars in my room at school. I have no idea why, but they're everywhere. We get calendars at the beginning of the month about what's going to be on the lunch menu every day and what activities are on that day. So we are people that are very concerned about time and its passing and the future. We're concerned about the future and what the future holds. So James addresses this in James chapter 4. He addresses the concept of time and the future and the passing of time and gives us instructions about the best way to handle the passing of time. Our text this morning, James chapter 4, beginning in verse 13 and following. James chapter 4, beginning in verse 13. James writes, "Come now, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to such and such a city, spend a year there, buy and sell and make a profit. Whereas you do not know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? It's even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. Instead, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance. All such boasting is evil. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin." The first 2 verses give us a great principle by which to lead our lives as far as time is concerned. And that is the words, "you do not know." That's what he teaches us in those first 2 verses. He gives an example of someone who says, well, today or tomorrow, we're going to go into such and such a city and spend a year there and buy and sell and make a profit. Notice all the ands, especially if you have a different translation. And, we're going to do this and do that and do that and do that. He had confidence in his own self, in his own success. That's why he kept saying, and. It was his belief that he controlled everything. So he said, I'll be able to leave, or maybe today or tomorrow, and I will go to such a city. And I will stay there a year. And I will sell. And I will make a profit. See, it was all about thinking he controlled all of that. He controlled everything about the future. This is certainly not just a New Testament concept. Back in Proverbs, the wise man Solomon says in Proverbs 19, beginning in verse 20, he tells us about making plans. Making plans. Proverbs 19, verse 20. Solomon writes, "Listen to counsel," or listen to advice, "and receive instruction." Says, I'm going to give you some wise instructions here. Listen. "That you may be wise in your latter days." You want to be wise? Listen to this. Solomon says, "There are many plans in a man's heart. Nevertheless, the Lord's counsel, it will stand." Men can make plans and make plans and make plans, but if they're not in accordance with God's plans, they will come to nothing. Because it's God's plans that matter. It's God's plans that will stand. So this man back in James was making plans without regard for God. Now, he's certainly not saying, well, never make plans for anything. But he is saying, don't plan all of these things. Don't plan for years and years about all you're going to do and never once think about what God has planned. That was this guy's problem, was arrogance. That was the problem. It wasn't planning. It was the arrogance by which he was planning. Because he thought he controlled everything. And then if I'm going to go to this city and stay a year, then I'm going to do it regardless. No one has any power to stop me from doing that, from carrying out my plan. That was his real problem, was that arrogance. So there wasn't any room for God. Back in Psalm 33, here the writer says, beginning in verse 10, Psalms 33, verse 10, says, "The Lord brings the counsel of the nations to nothing. He makes the plans of the peoples of no effect. The counsel of the Lord stands forever, the plans of His heart to all generations." God can thwart, bring to nothing the plans of nations, the plans of peoples, the plans of individuals, because it's His counsel, it's His will, it's His plans that will stand. And so this person back here was not taking any regard for God, wasn't thinking that God had anything to do with it, didn't have any room for God in what he was doing. But no man can see the future. No man can see the future. We don't have that power. Back in Ecclesiastes chapter 9, back when we studied that particular book, the writer says this in Ecclesiastes 9 and verse 11. Ecclesiastes 9, verse 11. "I returned and saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, nor bread to the wise, nor riches to men of understanding, nor favor to men of skill. But time and chance happen to them all." Regardless of your plans, time and chance happens. So just because you make plans to do such and such, don't think that time and chance can't change them. Don't be so arrogant, don't be so proud that you think that it's all about you. See, that was this guy's problem. It was all about him and what he wanted. No regard for anything else. And so he thought, well, whatever I want to do, I'm going to do it. Nothing's going to stop me. Didn't make any difference about God. He was leaving God completely out of the picture. So what did this guy need to do? He says, "You do not know what will happen tomorrow, let alone a year from now." See, this guy was planning a whole year down the road. And James reminds him, you don't even know what's going to happen tomorrow. You may be here, you may not be. You may be healthy, you may not be. So many things happen. Don't be proud and arrogant, self-willed. Always have room in your plans for God. Because he says, your life is like a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away. How many people in here look back at their life and cannot believe that 30 years have passed, 40 years have passed, 50 years have passed, 60 years have passed? That's what he says. He says, your life is like a vapor. It's here for a while, and then it's gone. That is one lesson, because God made us creatures of time. In other words, the world we live in is a world of time, where time passes. So he's tried to get us to understand from the very beginning that our lives are very short. Some of the terms he uses, of course, in this place, he says it's like a vapor or a mist. You know, it's here, and then you go out and it's gone. Psalms 102 verse 11 says it's like a shadow. He says, my days are like an evening shadow. I wither away like grass. Psalm 39 verse 5, he says, it's like a handbreadth. You have made my days a few handbreadths, and my lifetime is as nothing before you. Psalms 90 verse 9, he says it's like a sigh. We bring our years to an end like a sigh. That's how fast. You sigh and it's done. Job 7 verse 6, he says it's like a weaver's shuttle. My days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle. You've ever seen a weaver's shuttle, or maybe you've gone down to Silver Dollar City during those times and see a weaver's shuttle, brings it down, and it's done. That's how fast it is. Job 9 verse 25 says, your days are like a runner. My days are swifter than a runner. They flee away. That's how we live. Our lifetime. The days go by. They're swift. They're fast. They're like a vapor. They're like a shadow. They're like a sigh. They're like that shuttle. They go by so quickly. So he tries to get us to learn that lesson, not just in James, but throughout the Bible. Understand, you don't know the future. Time and chance happens to everybody. Don't make plans without God. Don't be so proud and arrogant to think that you control everything. Because your life is here today and gone tomorrow. You do not know. Then James teaches another lesson. He says, instead you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we shall live and do this or that. But now you boast in your arrogance, and all such boasting is evil. What does he want us to understand? That we're supposed to work with God. That's what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to work with God. So that's what it means when we say, if the Lord wills. That means we're working with God's will. We're not against God's will or thinking that our will is the only one that matters. We're supposed to work with God's will. Even the inspired Apostle Paul didn't know when certain things would happen or if they would happen. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and there are lots of places in his life that we could look, but we'll look at just a few. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, and then we'll go to chapter 16. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 19. This is what Paul writes. Talking to the church at Corinth, he says, but I will come to you shortly, if the Lord wills. And I will know not the word of those who are puffed up, but the power. It says, I will come to you shortly, if the Lord wills it. In verse 16 of that same letter, toward the very end of the book, he writes this in verse 7. For I do not wish to see you now on the way, but I hope to stay a while with you, if the Lord permits. If the Lord permits. When he left Ephesus, Paul told the church, Acts chapter 18, verse 21, I will return to you if God wills. This was an inspired apostle. But yet he still said, I will do this or I will do that if the Lord permits, or if it's God's will, if it's the Lord's doing, I will come to you. So James says you're being proud and you're being arrogant if you really believe that you're masters of your own fate. If you really believe that you control everything and it's all about you and you doing what you want, he says you are being arrogant. The Bible talks about people like this. Remember this account in Luke chapter 12? We read about a man who actually believed he was master of his own fate. Luke chapter 12, read with me a few of these verses. You'll remember the account. Beginning in verse 16 of Luke chapter 12, Jesus spoke a parable to them, saying, the ground of a certain rich man yielded plentifully. And he thought within himself, saying, what shall I do, since I have no room to store my crops? So he said, I will do this. I will pull down my barns and build greater, and there I will store all my crops and my goods, and I will say to my soul, Soul, you have many goods laid up for many years. Take your ease, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, Fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Then whose will those things be which you have provided? So is he who lays up treasure for himself and is not rich toward God. See, he was arrogant. He thought, all right, I've done all of this. Now I'm going to put all of these in bigger barns. And I have all of this for many, many years. See, he thought he had many, many years. But he didn't include God in his plans. It was all about him. Notice how he said I and my over and over and over again. It was all about himself. I will do this and I will do that. Never thinking a minute about God. So he says what you should do is say, if the Lord wills. And I don't think he means for us to say that every single time. If the Lord wills, I'm going to eat lunch today. Or if the Lord wills, I'm going to walk through those doors. No, I don't think he means for us to say that all the time. But that should be our attitude. That we don't control everything. And it's not all about us. It should be about God's will. You know, Jesus himself said that he didn't come to do his will, but the will of the Father. So Jesus knew it wasn't about him. So if he knew that, certainly we should. And then the last point James makes is in the last verse when he says, Therefore, because of what he's written, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Now he's mentioned a lot of things in this chapter that people should do. One of the things was they should submit to God. They should draw near to God. They should cleanse their hands. They should humble themselves. They should not speak evil of another person. They also should not make plans without God. So if we know what's right, if we know what is the right thing to do, James says we are now under obligation to do it. That's what he means by that. If we know what is the right thing to do, we are obligated. Making plans with God, that's what we're supposed to do. So our plan should always include God. Sometimes these are called sins of omission. Things that we should do that we don't do. You know, and often we focus on how wrong it is to do certain things, and of course there's many things that it's wrong to do. But it's equally wrong, and James emphasizes this, it's equally wrong to know to do something, whatever the something is, and something that you have the power and ability and an opportunity to do, and you choose not to do it. James says that is just as much a sin as it is to lie or cheat or steal or kill or hate. Just as much a sin. In Matthew chapter 23, notice what Jesus said to the Pharisees. They were leaving out things that they knew to do. Matthew chapter 23, verse 23. Jesus says to them, Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected, in other words, left out, the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. What was he chastising them for? Because they were paying tithe of those mints? No, they were supposed to do that. He was condemning them because they were not practicing justice or mercy or faith. They were leaving things undone, and he was condemning them for it because they should have been doing those things. Back in, and I should have stayed there in Matthew chapter 25. This, of course, is the great judgment scene. When the Son of Man comes to judge the nations. Beginning in verse 41. It says, Jesus will say to those on the left hand, Depart from me, you cursed, into the everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. Now notice why these people are being condemned into everlasting hell. This is serious stuff he's getting ready to say. Notice the reasons. They didn't murder, they didn't lie, they didn't cheat, they didn't steal. He says, I was hungry and you gave me no food. That's why you're being condemned. I was thirsty and you gave me no drink. I was a stranger, you did not take me in, naked, and you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, and you did not visit me. Then they'll answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or naked or sick or in prison, did not minister you? Then he will answer them, saying, I say to you, inasmuch as you did not do it to one of the least of these, you did not do it to me. That's the sin of omission. And that's why they were being sent into everlasting condemnation. Not because of something they did, but it was because of something they did not do. They had an opportunity to clothe these people. They chose not to do it. Decisions. They had an opportunity to visit. They chose not to. They had an opportunity to clothe, to feed, to give people something to drink, whatever. Those are just some things. So they had the chance, they had the opportunity, they had the resources, they had the time, and they said no. They knew this was something they should do. That's why they were condemned. They apparently hadn't ever lied, cheated, or stolen, or murdered, or anything like that. Not anything they had done, but there were a lot of things they did not do. And that's why they were condemned. So knowing what should be done and having the ability and resources to do it obligates you to do it. Obligates you to do it. There's a lot of things I would like to do, but I don't have the resources or ability to do it. He doesn't hold me accountable for that. He holds me accountable for the things I can do that I don't do. That's what he holds me accountable for. And that's when it becomes a sin. So when I know that there are things that should be done, and I can do them, and I choose not to do them, that's my decision. Then he says, it is a soul-condemning sin. Whether it's making plans without God, whether it's being proud and arrogant, or whatever he talks about in this chapter, or anything, whatever it is, if I know I should do it, and I can do it, I have the ability to do it, and I choose not to, I have sinned at that point, and I need to ask for forgiveness. So the question is, are we wasting God's time? You know, we all have a very limited amount of time on earth. Some of us are certainly closer to death. Every day we get closer to death. Some of us, our lives are certainly half over. We look at what the Bible says about time. So are we wasting the time God has given us? And how are we using that time? And are we thinking about God's plans? And are we putting Him first? That's what James wants us to do. And that's how James wants us to live. You don't know the future. So when you make plans, make sure God is a part of those plans. And make sure the time that you do have left, you don't waste on selfishness or whatever, but you use for God. Those are the lessons James wants us to know. We have an opportunity to do good, let us do it. Now the invitation's yours. If you've been wasting time and are not using it wisely, maybe you need the prayers of the congregation to help you to make better decisions. Or maybe you've never made the decision to become a part of the body of Christ. But whatever it is, if you need to come, we encourage you to come as we stand and sing this song.